Welcome, scholars, to Lesson 5-2.2, the Ming Dynasty. We're going to get really into the early stages of the Ming Dynasty and find out some things that they were up to that really separates them from the Yuan. So hold on, and here we go. The Ming Dynasty. All right, so it began with that Hongwu Emperor, that vastly martial emperor. And it spends almost his entire reign fighting these internal battles to get rid of the last vestiges of the Mongols and secure his power over a unified China. Now, the Hongwu Emperor will eventually die, and despite all of his struggles for unity, he does wind up having an internal struggle for power once he dies. This is within his very own family, within his own dynasty, so this inter-dynasty conflict. You see, the Yongle Emperor had chosen his grandson to be the next emperor, and briefly he was. That was until his the grandson's uncle, so a different son of the Yongle Emperor, rebelled against him in a coup, trapped him inside of his own palace, and set the palace on fire. So, yeah, that emperor is gone, and we wind up now with the Yongle Emperor. So the Yongle Emperor is going to be the second major emperor that we talk about in the Ming Dynasty. Now, the Hongwu Emperor, that very first emperor, had focused really on internal affairs, solidifying his rule, unifying China, being the new dynasty. The Yongle Emperor, however, is going to focus his energies and efforts externally. The Ming Dynasty is now definitely in charge of China. They don't need to worry about these internal struggles anymore, and nobody's really going to rebel against somebody who burns his nephew's family to death. This is not a guy who's got a lot of pity in his heart. So he is uncontested internally for the most part, and is focused externally on expanding his power. And over 20 years, China is going to fight and expand their borders under this ruler. The Yongle Emperor is able to expand Chinese borders outward. He does want to do this. He wants to expand. He also wants to expand trade. So he's going to be very interested in that aspect of the Tang Dynasty. The Yuans had done so well, this idea of being the center of this global trade network along the Silk Road. So he wants to tap into that and gain that wealth. So the way he does that is with the Chinese treasure fleet. The Yongle Emperor is going to place this guy right here, Zheng He, in command of a giant treasure fleet. And I do mean a giant treasure fleet. This massive thing had more than 1,000 ships. Now, it wouldn't be true that all 1,000 went out at one time, but at different times, the Ming treasure fleet had 1,000 ships. Now, the treasure ships were the center of this, and there were dozens of these things. They were 1.5 football fields long, more than 150 yards long. For comparison's sake, here is one of the treasure ships that the Ming Dynasty had that Zheng He commanded, and this is the flagship of Christopher Columbus. This would be the Santa Maria. And we are talking about a similar time period here. So at the time that Spain's ships were this big, the Chinese ships were this big. And they had dozens of these guys. So we are talking about a massive fleet that the Chinese have. Now, Yongle trade was led by this man, Zheng He. He's going to lead a total of 7 of them during his life. And he's going to visit ports right along the coast of the Ming China. He's going to go down to Indonesia, these islands down here. He's going to wrap around and visit the Mughal Emperor and trade with them before popping over to the Persians, Arabia, and Africa. Went about halfway down the coast of Africa, but never did round it, never did wind up going over to the Atlantic. Things may have been very different if the Chinese had been the first to make that westward voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. As Zheng He is doing this, he's spreading knowledge of China and, importantly, its wealth around the Indian Ocean. All of these empires are seeing firsthand the wealth of China and the power of China. They were able to put together these massive fleets. They must be powerful. And this has tremendous PR, public relations, value for the Chinese. However, the downside, these 7 voyages, this massive fleet, actually brings in very little new wealth. Most of the wealth of these areas, the Persians, the Mughals, Arabia, etc., This was based upon their control of Silk Road trade. Their wealth was based upon moving Chinese goods from east to west. They didn't have the tremendous independent wealth that China was really looking to bring in. So while China goes out there, they're trading with these individuals. The Silk Road was as efficient, more efficient way to do it than these massive fleets, which were very expensive and did not cover their own costs very well. Now, the other aspect of Ming foreign policy is invasions, fighting for expansion. Now, the Yongle Emperor wants to end the Mongol threat once and for all. The Northern Yuan dynasty is still in charge of Mongolia. They are weakened, but they are not gone. So the Mongols are still in Mongolia. They are an independent power north of China. And the Yongle Emperor wants to take care of that. He wants to conquer all that the Yuans had once conquered and rule all of this territory here. So he leads an attack. Now, while fighting in Mongolia, unfortunately, the Yongle Emperor becomes sick and he dies. Not a lot of pity for the guy who burns his family, but he dies. And we really transition out of an important period in Chinese history with the death of the Yongle Emperor. He was very adventurous. He was very interested in trade. He wanted to go out and see the world. But the experiences were that the Mongols continued their attacks. He wasn't able to defeat them, and they keep attacking China, so that was a failure. The trade fleet had been a huge expense and not brought in a whole lot of new wealth, so that was kind of a failure. So over time, the Ming realized that, they are the wealthiest. There is nobody out there in the world that has anything that they need, that they have to go through this expense of going out and finding it. If people wanted to trade with the Ming, they could come to China. And the Ming were just fine with that. And there's no expense incurred by the Chinese by just letting others come to them. So they really do turn away from this sort of adventurism and contact with the outside world. And they become more and more isolationist. They separate themselves from the rest of the world instead of getting involved. The Great Wall of China is really a clear example of this. The Ming built the Great Wall of China to control trade and attacks from Mongolia. Now, I have to say this because somebody wants to call me out on it already. The Ming did not build the Great Wall. They expanded it. They rebuilt sections. The modern version, and what we look at in pictures today, this was mostly done by the Ming. There was a Great Wall prior to the Ming Dynasty. It's just they're the ones responsible for the images that we see in these pictures. So if you were to walk on the Great Wall, chances are you are walking on something the Ming created. So when I say the Ming built the Great Wall, it's because they built what we think of as the Great Wall. The wall is over 5,500 miles long. That would stretch all the way across the United States without any problem. And it is the clearest example of these very intentional barriers that existed between China and the rest of the world. This is a very physical symbol of the fact that they are separating themselves from the world. So that is the Ming Dynasty. It starts out kind of adventurous and then becomes very isolationist, really through most of the rest of that dynasty. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.